German Chancellor Angela has called some of the European Union's trade agreements with Africa unfair. She says it's high time they're renegotiated. Now, African governments and NGOs have repeatedly complained that some of the trade deals between the EU and Africa don't support development, but rather increase hardship on the continent.
Well, Germany's Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development says it wants to help African countries make their economies more climate friendly. Other priorities listed in the ministry's newly unveiled Africa strategy include improving social and health services and making the agriculture sector less dependent on foreign-sourced seed, fertilizer, and pesticides.
Now it is just 5 days until voters here in Germany go to the polls in snap elections. The main candidates, including Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his Conservative challenger Friedrich Merz, appeared on TV on Monday night to answer voters' questions. One of the top issues in the campaign has been migration, and another is the country's lagging economy. Now, Germany is facing a third straight year of economic crisis, with most Germans increasingly worried about making ends meet. Blame is falling on politicians.
Africa has been here before, watched, studied, measured, and targeted by powerful nations who believed they could walk in, take what they wanted, and walk out richer than they came. But this time, something different happened. Germany thought it would be business as usual. They wanted exclusive access to Africa's most valuable minerals: cobalt, lithium, copper, the same minerals that power electric cars, smartphones, and the future of global energy. They wanted it all to themselves. No competition, no negotiation, no respect for African sovereignty. But Africa answered with a word the world never expected. No, not this time. Not these minerals. Not this future. Confusion hit Berlin. Shock followed. Germany believed Africa would sign the deal immediately because for decades, foreign powers had treated Africa like a quiet marketplace, not a strategic powerhouse. But today's Africa is awake, confident, and ready to protect its own wealth. And when Germany realized Africa was saying no, not out of anger but out of power, voices rose across Europe. How could Africa do this? Why refuse such an offer? What does this mean for Germany's energy future? What they didn't know was simple. Africa is no longer selling its future for quick profits. Africa is building something bigger: value, industries, jobs, and leverage. Germany wanted exclusive access. But Africa shut the door, locked it, and kept the key. And now the world is shaken. For decades, whenever discussions about global minerals came up, Africa was always mentioned but rarely respected. The world talked about Africa's copper, Africa's cobalt, Africa's lithium, but almost never about Africa's power. Foreign governments designed strategies, corporations drafted billion-dollar plans, and global leaders held closed-door meetings about how to secure access to African resources. It was a quiet competition, a silent tension everyone understood but nobody openly admitted. And Germany, one of the world's strongest industrial countries, believed it could take the lead in this contest easily, quietly, and unchallenged. Germany had one vision: secure exclusive access to Africa's minerals before the rest of Europe or Asia could. Not partial access, not shared access, exclusive access. Because Germany understood something most people overlook: the future of the world is not oil. The future is not gas. The future is not coal. The future is minerals, critical minerals. The ones that make electric cars move, the ones that store energy, the ones that power phones, batteries, satellites, and the entire digital economy. Germany saw Africa the same way many powers once did: a land full of opportunity but strategically unprepared to negotiate tough deals. In their mind, Africa would welcome them with open arms the moment they offered a shiny contract. It would be quick, it would be clean, and they would walk away with a multi-decade exclusive rights deal. Their diplomats arrived with confidence. Their corporations arrived with strategy. Their negotiators arrived with the belief that history would repeat itself. But they were wrong. Because this time Africa was not the Africa they expected. Negotiators in African capitals were more informed, more coordinated, and more aware of global mineral demand than ever before. Ministers were not desperate, they were prepared. They understood something Germany did not expect them to understand. Critical minerals are the oil of the 21st century, and whoever controls them controls the future. And so when Germany presented its proposal, full access to mineral sites, long-term extraction rights, and priority supply guaranteed, African leaders listened. They listened carefully, they listened fully. And then they did something Germany was not ready for. They shut the door. The rejection was not rude, it was not emotional, it was not reactive. It was strategic, well calculated, deeply thought out, and grounded in a long-term plan for Africa's economic independence. When Germany heard the answer, silence filled the room. Confusion followed, then shock. This was not supposed to happen. This was not in the plan. This was not how Africa was expected to respond. To understand why this decision hit Germany so hard, you must understand what was really at stake. Germany is currently fighting an economic battle most of the world doesn't fully see. The battle to remain a manufacturing superpower in a world changing faster than expected. Their car industry, BMW, Volkswagen, Mercedes, depends heavily on batteries. Batteries depend on minerals, and those minerals. Africa has some of the largest reserves on the planet. If Germany controls African lithium, German cars remain globally competitive. If Germany controls African cobalt, German factories stay alive. If Germany controls African copper, German machinery keeps running. But if Germany doesn't, the future becomes uncertain. That is exactly why this rejection shook Berlin. Reporters in Europe began asking, why did Africa refuse? Analysts tried to guess. Politicians expressed concern. Companies panicked quietly in boardrooms. But Africa already knew the answer. Because for decades, Africa lived through the consequences of signing away its natural resources for cheap deals that benefited everyone except the African people. Raw minerals left the continent. Finished products returned. Billions were made but rarely in Africa. Factories were built elsewhere. Jobs were created elsewhere. Wealth circulated elsewhere. But this time, Africa was not interested in repeating that cycle. Today's Africa is no longer satisfied being a supplier of raw materials. Today's Africa wants to be a producer, a manufacturer, a processor. A continent that converts minerals into batteries, into technology, into wealth right here on African soil. African leaders told Germany something powerful, something unexpected, something history will remember. We are no longer giving exclusive access. If you want minerals from Africa, you must build industries in Africa. You must create jobs in Africa. You must share the future with Africa. It wasn't a no to partnership. It was a no to exploitation. It was a no to one-sided deals. It was a no to the old system. And it was a yes to Africa's future. The reaction was immediate. In Berlin, energy officials warned the government that losing access to African minerals could delay green transitions and push industries into crisis. German automakers privately complained that Africa's decision threatened production timelines. Economists predicted shortages, price hikes, and increased competition from Asia, especially China, which already invested heavily in African mineral infrastructure. This no was not a small diplomatic disagreement. It was a continental shift, one that the world did not see coming. Africa had made a decision that sent a message around the world. We will no longer trade our minerals for promises. Build here or walk away. Suddenly, other European countries began worrying that they too would be rejected if they asked for exclusive rights. Negotiators who once walked into African ministries with confidence now walked in with caution. African leaders were no longer sitting at the table as junior partners, they were sitting as equals. In some cases, they were sitting with the leverage, because Africa now holds something priceless. Essential minerals that every major country needs but cannot easily replace, cobalt for electric cars. Africa has over 70% of global reserves, manganese for steel and batteries. Africa leads the world. Copper for wiring, machinery, power systems. Africa is overflowing with it, lithium for battery storage. Africa's reserves are growing fast, and because the world is in a rush to transition to clean energy, demand for these minerals is exploding. Every country wants them, but only a few countries have them, and Africa is at the top of that list. Germany expected Africa to rush toward quick cash, but Africa chose long-term dignity over short-term convenience. Instead of signing exclusive deals, Africa is now pushing countries to invest in mineral processing plants, battery factories, refineries, skill development, technology transfer, jobs for local citizens, and infrastructure. That remains even after the minerals are gone. This decision is more than economic, it is historical, because this is the first time Africa has leveraged its mineral wealth not as a weakness, but as power. For the first time, Africa is using global urgency to negotiate from a position of strength. For the first time, Africa is deciding who gets access, how much access, and under what terms. And Germany, a country that expected a simple victory, now realizes the rules have changed. Africa is no longer playing defense. Africa is controlling the game. The rejection was firm but respectful. African leaders understood the consequences of such a decision. They knew industries in Europe would react. They knew investors would talk. They knew media would twist narratives. But they also knew something far more important. The minerals they protect today will shape the Africa their children inherit tomorrow. The day Africa said no, something remarkable happened inside the continent. Economists applauded. Citizens celebrated quietly. Analysts said Africa had just made one of its strongest strategic moves in decades. Because shutting the door was not about rejecting Germany, it was about protecting African destiny. In several African countries, government officials began reviewing old mining contracts, revisiting unfair agreements, and demanding better terms. The impact spread across the continent like a wave of confidence. Nations that once felt pressured to accept foreign deals suddenly felt empowered to renegotiate. Africa has waited centuries for this moment, a moment where the world needs Africa more than Africa needs the world. And when you are needed, you have power. When you have power, you have leverage. And when you have leverage, you finally get to choose your future. Germany's loss is not just a diplomatic setback. It is a warning to all foreign powers. If you want Africa's minerals, you must come with respect, partnership, and fairness, because the door will no longer open for those who come with greed, entitlement, or old colonial thinking. Africa is rising not just as a resource supplier, but as a global player, a continent that creates, not just exports, a continent that negotiates, not just accepts, a continent that knows its worth, a continent that is ready to shape the future. Germany wanted exclusive access. Africa shut the door, and by doing so, Africa opened. A new one that leads to value, sovereignty, and global respect. As the dust settled over this historic decision, something powerful became clear. Africa did not just reject a deal. Africa reclaimed a voice, one that had been muted, dismissed, or underestimated for generations. The moment Germany walked out of that negotiation room, the world finally realized what Africa had known all along. The continent is no longer a silent participant in global economics. It is a rising force reshaping the future. This wasn't simply about minerals. This was about dignity, about self-respect, about the deep understanding that the wealth buried beneath African soil is not a curse, it is an inheritance. For too long, that inheritance was taken, traded, or controlled by outsiders who profited while African communities struggled. But not anymore. Not today. Not in this new chapter. Africa's decision to shut the door was not born from anger, it was born from awakening. Generations before had watched foreign powers come and go, carrying shiploads of resources, leaving behind empty promises and exhausted lands. They had no power to stop it, no leverage to negotiate better terms. But this generation, the generation rising now, refuses to carry that same burden. This generation is rewriting the script, and as Germany returned home confused, disappointed, even frustrated, the real victory remained on African soil. Because this decision sent a message far louder than any speech, any press conference, any international statement. Africa knows its worth. Africa will no longer sell its future for pennies. Africa will no longer sign contracts that leave its people with crumbs while others feast. For the first time in a long time, Africa said, if you want to benefit from Africa, Africa must benefit too. That statement alone is a revolution. Across the continent, from the mining towns of Zambia to the mineral-rich hills of the Congo, from the copper belts of Botswana to the lithium fields of Zimbabwe, the mood shifted. The feeling in the air changed. Ordinary people could sense something different. Young Africans began to believe that, maybe, just maybe, the future could finally belong to them. That their land, their resources, their intelligence, and their labor could build something extraordinary. Because this wasn't just a negotiation win. It was a psychological shift. A declaration that Africa will rise not by depending on foreign powers, but by protecting its resources, developing its industries, and demanding fairness. And it wasn't just Germany that felt the shock. Quietly, other nations began watching and whispering, if Africa can reject Germany, what about us? Will Africa refuse our exclusive deals too? Are we losing influence? In boardrooms across Europe and Asia, analysts began reevaluating their strategies. The old playbook where Africa was expected to accept anything no longer worked. The world had to adjust to a new truth. Africa now controls the table. And maybe this is what the ancestors had hoped for. Maybe this is the destiny the continent was always meant to reach, a reality where Africa stands tall, proud, and unafraid. A reality where Africa is not exploited but respected. A reality where the children of Africa grow up in a world where their continent's wealth builds schools, factories, hospitals, industries, and futures, not billion-dollar empires outside their borders. This is more than economics, it's identity, it's justice, it's a long-awaited turning point. Because minerals run out, deals expire, governments change, but the psychological shift, the awakening of self-worth, lasts forever. And the day Africa shut that door, the world finally saw a version of Africa it could no longer ignore. Confident, strategic, unstoppable. Maybe one day Germany will return with a different approach, a respectful one, a fair one, a mutually beneficial one. And Africa may open the door again, not because it needs foreign approval, but because it now chooses partnerships on its own terms. But for now, this moment stands as a reminder that Africa is not what the world believed it to be. This is a continent awakening to its power, a continent that knows its minerals are not just rocks in the ground, they are leverage. They are influence, they are the keys to a new global order, and Africa just decided who holds those keys. The world is watching, Africa is rising, and this is only the beginning.